Hey, everybody.
We're live.
Hey, yo. No intro.
Yep. No intro today. Just going to kind of free ball this here. Um, Doing our Bible study, starting it back up.
We got to start a thing like Rogan does. What is he says? We got to do one like before the echo all day, all night.
Yeah. Have somebody yell it at us.
Yeah, somebody off at night. Then we just start, hey, what's going on?
Yeah. Hey,
Anyway,
Patrick, how's it going?
he's had some good folks for Christianity on lately. Had Mel Gibson on. I thought that was pretty cool to listen
Yeah.
to him talk. He's interesting.
Wes Huff.
Yeah.
He's that's a rabbit hole if you guys haven't started yet. The Wes Huff, he has a YouTube channel called Wes Huff, I think. And boy, he's a biblical scholar and he is knowledgeable on stuff.
Yeah. He made Billy Carson really. Did you watch how he kind of went viral? Did you watch the video of him and Billy Carson debating the stuff? Yeah, man, he was so strong in that argument. It really shocked me because Billy Carson, I've listened to him and I've been like, man, that's crazy. But are there really these tablets that talk about aliens and all these stories that match biblical stories that happen, tens of thousands, 10,000 years before the actual Bible started and all this stuff? And then, man, when you started listening to him talk, and Wes Huff broke him down in which, I'm believer in the Bible, but it makes you kind of, you go, well, what is this all about? And then he just,
come to find out it's a bunch of kind of BS, right?
Yeah, well, he showed that all the information and sources he was citing were already, nobody.
They're known forgeries, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Yeah. If you hadn't watched that guy, Wes Huff, he's freaking brilliant.
Yeah.
Real cool.
So we're going to start going through Mathew. We got a little, when me and Patrick started talking about doing this, we got a little rambunctious, I guess. We were going to try to go through 1 through 12 tonight, but we got to studying it and we're like, this is too much information to go through in one night. So we kind of cut that down to really a quarter of that or a third of that to just the first 4 chapters. And next week, we're probably going to, honestly, chapter 5 next week is probably what we'll go over because that's a big chapter in Matthew. That's where the Beatitudes are and the Sermon on the Mountain. There's probably a lot to talk about there. But we're going to start in Matthew. That's where, like, a lot of people that start reading the Bible, that's a good place to start. Also, I was going to tell you guys, I got this new Bible. I'm a huge fan of it. It's a spiral-bound Bible. And then it has like a note section on the side. You can take notes on it. And it's $20. And I linked to the Amazon link to it. So if you guys don't have a Bible or want to get a good Bible like this, I like this thing. I recommend it. And the pages are real nice and thick. They're like proper, like paper, like computer paper pages.
Yeah, and if you get one too, you could probably, when we do our podcast, you could.
Yeah, you'll be.
To keep notes as we talk, or as you see stuff that you want to go back and look at, it would probably be, helpful too.
Yeah, Patrick has one, and or he's getting one tomorrow, I think. And then
thanks to my good buddy here.
Yeah, we'll this is the English Standard Version too. So if you got that Bible too, that'll be work. Anything will work. But yeah, we're gonna try. Go ahead.
Do they have an Old Testament version of that too?
They do. Yeah, this is just the New Testament. This one is just, but you got to buy the Old Testament. It's $20 too, I think, or $23 or something like that. I can't remember exactly how much.
A little more paper in the Old Testament than there is the New Testament.
Yeah. You know what? I shouldn't quote that. I think it's the same price, but I could be wrong. Anyway, we might as well get started because there's going to be a lot to talk about, and we'll get into it. All right, so how I'm going to set this up is I'm not going to really read anything out of the Old Testament. We're just going to start talking about it and kind of telling you guys the story of Matthew. And I got a bunch of notes. I know Patrick does too, and we'll just kind of talk about what's interesting to us. So Matthew, it's the first gospel here. It starts out with Jesus's birth, and honestly, there's in Matthew, there's not as much detail about Jesus's birth as some other places in the Bible. It's a pretty short little paragraph about Jesus's birth, but you guys know, angel comes down and lets Mary know that she's going to give birth to God's son, right? That's how it starts off. And Patrick, I wanted your opinion on this, man. When Joseph finds out about this, he's not happy about it, right? Like he decides he's going to divorce Mary quietly.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a common theme in Matthew is angels appear. Like angels, as angels like guide all throughout Matthew. They guide this book along. And an angel comes down to Joseph and essentially tells him that it's going to be okay, and life goes on then from there.
Yep.
That's how it starts out. But I don't think Joseph gets enough, like, we don't think about Joseph very often. Man alive, like for a man, he was just a man, right? He's nothing special. Like for him to go through what he did, like first of all, to supposedly have your wife pregnant that is not your son per se, that'd be hard for a man to deal with,
Mm-hmm.
even if you had a dream where an angel came down from heaven and told you about it.
Yep.
So
there's a few things like with Joseph. One thing that, and they've gone over this in church sermons too, is how much faith he had to have in God to go through with this, because you think about any man who is about to get married to a woman and then you find out, oh, she's pregnant. The first thing you're thinking is, well, especially back in that day, is she's unclean. She's not worth marrying, because she is, you don't forget about the woman they were stoning to death, because she had 5 husbands and things like that, right? So that was that's later on in Matthew, but that's talked about in the Bible quite a bit. So for him to, he wanted to keep it quiet and divorce her quietly because he didn't want to bring any shame upon her, and then and then he wasn't going to marry her, which is he wasn't going to follow through with the marriage, but instead these angels came to him and he had his faith and he chose to go along with it. Another thing you didn't touch on too is just kind of want to explain something that a lot of people might not realize is when you read the Matthew 1 through 16, it's that if you don't understand why it's naming all these, the record of Jesus' ancestors, why Matthew did that. I believe Matthew, some people say he might have been like on the spectrum, like he was very, like he was a note keeper, very particular.
Yeah.
The way he writes too is very time, place oriented. So when he did that, the prophecy of the Messiah was that he was going to come from the line of David. And so it goes back from verse 1, from Matthew 1, verse 1 through 16, where it ends in 16. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary gave birth.
It's a lineage. It's like a big long thing that nobody really wants to read.
Right. You're not going to.
Yeah, I don't know why I skipped over the whole first page of Matthew. I don't know why I did that.
Yeah, but it's because it's just this is further this. It just shows you the lineage, and I just want to explain to everybody, like, the reason for that is to he's doing that to prove his lineage for this record, this historical record of who Christ was, based on the Old Testament prophecies that were, hundreds and thousands of years before Jesus was born, to prove he was who he says he was.
Yeah.
But back to Joseph. He had a lot of faith, man. That was a big thing he did.
And Zeke, he makes a good point. Like, you don't hear much about Joseph after this period of time. Like, you don't hear much about him during the crucifixion, or nothing really. You always, like he said, you wonder what happened to him.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. It really doesn't say much about him. After he brings him back to, I think to Nazareth, and then I think that's kind of where it ends. And it's probably more because he's just not important after that. I would think maybe it's because that's when Jesus' ministry started, and there were, maybe these historians, maybe he passed, maybe he died.
Yeah, right. Who knows?
I don't know how old Joseph was, but Mary, his mother, is, if I'm right, his mother was his mother there at the crucifixion. I know Mary Magdalene was.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure she was. Yeah. Correct us if we're wrong, though. Like, also, just a footnote, we are not experts on any of this. So if you guys know something or we say something wrong, definitely mention it.
That's why we're studying it too with you guys.
Yeah.
We're just interested, but maybe that's what it is. I see Zeke said he lived with Jesus' brothers because he did have a brother, James, who also, and I don't think it was James, one of his apostles. I think it was, I don't think James was his brother was his apostle, but anyway, he had a brother, James. So maybe that's why Joseph doesn't appear. But what he did in the years prior to that were very important. And there's just not a whole lot historically known about what went on between his exile to Egypt and when he reappeared in Nazareth, started doing his ministry.
Yeah, and I think there's I don't know where it's at. Someone can say in the comment section, but there's a mention of Jesus in the Bible when he was 12 years old, and like other than that, there's nothing about him in between then. And like I think a lot of times people look into that a lot. Like people try to figure out what happened, but it's like maybe nothing. Like sometimes in a book you just leave out the parts that are boring or there's not a lot going on. So just wasn't that important to document his life in that time.
Yep.
Okay. So after that, the next kind of subtitle is the visit of the wise men. And the wise men, let's take it back here a little bit. Like Herod was the king then. And from what I've read about Herod, he was kind of a puppet king for Rome. Like he was always on this teetering edge of like nobody really liked him, and he was very scared that he was going to get dethroned by someone.
Yeah, insecure.
Yeah, he was kind of there just as a placeholder for the Roman Empire, I think, and they were the ones pulling the strings for Herod. So he got word that the Messiah was going to be born, and he did not like that, and he kind of was deceitful with the wise men, or he was trying to find out information about this Jesus, and he sent these wise men, and there's actually quite a bit of information about the wise men on online that I think is interesting. For one thing, like we portray in the United States, at least, like, you have manger scenes and stuff and the wise men are there, and that's not really what happened at all.
Yeah.
I think Jesus was known. They think he was probably about 2 when the wise men came, and there's proof of that in the Bible. It says that the wise men entered the house, wherever Jesus was living, entered the house. Let me look at my notes here. Also, I wonder, like, so word spread about Jesus in those days. I wonder how fast that was, because like Herod got word that this Jesus was going to do.
Well, Herod got word from the wise men because there was the prophecy.
Okay.
The prophecy, I looked at it. The prophecy is Isaiah 7:14, and it says, "Look, look, this virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God is with us."
Okay.
So
yeah.
These wise men already knew of this prophecy from the Old Testament and Isaiah, and I think they got signs from angels as well.
They did.
Came that said, "Hey, look, he's here. He's coming. This
Follow
is what to look for." And then because they were wise men, they went to Herod and told Herod, "Hey, we want you to know this King of the Jews, he's coming and he's here." Not to kill him, because they didn't know what Herod's ultimate intent would be. And angels appeared again.
Herod was very deceitful. He was actually, I think it even mentions like he wanted to worship him as well, is what they told the wise men. And something else, the wise men are often referred to as magi. That's another word for the wise man. And all they were like representations of like the wealthy class of the Gentiles. Gentiles are non-Jews. So you had like Jews and Gentiles.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, and they followed the star to Bethlehem, and more than likely Jesus was around 2 years old. Is there anything else in that little like section there, Patrick, that you can think of talking about?
No, I mean, they met with him. They met with Jesus, and then they were supposed to go back. We've talked about that, to tell Herod what they had found.
Yeah.
And when they were going back, they were warned by the angels. And then after
yeah. I got that in here too. Now. I'm looking.
Yeah, and it said, here's another prophecy. This one comes from, I looked these up too, so I could. This one is Micah 5:2. I think that was it. I think it's Micah 5:2 is the where the Messiah was supposed to be born. That was what they were told by the prophet. Prophet Micah is the one that told him the place, which would be Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And in Micah it says, "But you Bethlehem, Ephrathah, I guess is how you pronounce that. I don't know. Excuse me. Though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from the ancient times." So origins are from the old, from David, from ancient times, and he'll come out of Judah and he'll come out of Bethlehem. So Judah is Israel, what we call modern day Israel, where Bethlehem is. So that was the message they got from if you wanted to go back and say, okay, man, did they really get this message? Well, the message was from the prophet. So all this stuff is adding up. So if you're a person that doubts or wants to ever tell someone why you believe what you believe or why this is true, the reason is because you can compare what the Bible said hundreds of years before to what's happening in the New Testament. And I always say this, I'm going to say it a ton. If you haven't watched me on the show, it's a historical document. It's not a religious document. It has been made to be a religious document, but it is a historical document that has endured thousands of years.
Yeah, and
so
was saying that, like, you guys should really go watch some of that Wes Huff stuff, because he's a biblical historian or biblical scholar and a linguist, or however you pronounce it. He studies languages.
Yeah, linguist. Yeah,
and he goes through like all kinds of stuff about the Bible and how they know, where they got the word from and how it all fits together and how they figured it all out. And it's super interesting.
Yeah, and how they use certain methods to that they put everything through to verify. It's called historicity. Yeah. That's a new word. I've known it about a year or two since I've been watching a lot of this stuff on content and stuff. But historicity, which is the authenticity of history of a historical document. So that's what they use. So if you ever want to, like, somebody says, man, how do you know that's real? Well, you can go and you can show them. If you have a study Bible, you'll kind of have a reference there. You can go back into some of these prophets and say, hey, these prophets prophesied this like hundreds of years. Like, these guys knew about this when it came, but it actually happened as these guys who were there years before said it would at the time they said it would. So
yeah. Yep. You mentioned this a second ago, but when the wise men were leaving Bethlehem, they had another angel come to them and warn them not to return to Herod. I think you already said that, but and that's kind of where the wise men in Matthew, they don't talk about the shepherds or anybody else coming to see Jesus. That's all they talk about.
Mm-hmm.
James mentioned the shepherds came early, and they just, in Matthew, it's not, they don't mention the shepherds. And then the next portion here of chapter 2 is an angel coming again to Joseph and warning him not to go back to Egypt because of Herod, the problems Herod was going to put on them if they went back there.
Mm-hmm.
So now, here I got a map of.
So I'm gonna go on too while you're looking that map up too for another thing. So in Hosea, I guess is how you would say it, 11:1, a voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Rachel weeping for her children. Rachel was the mother of all the Jews, to be comforted because they were no more. So that was a prophecy about King Herod going out and killing all the children 2 years and under.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I said that they shouldn't go to Egypt. They were supposed to flee to Egypt because Herod knew that they were in Bethlehem.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was in Egypt, or he was gone from Israel for, 28 years, I guess, because he started his ministry at 30 when he came back.
Yeah. So this is a little map, because I'm always like confused as far as the geographic location of things. But born here in Bethlehem, and they flee down here to Egypt to get away from Herod's persecution. Says they lived there for 1 to 2 years in Egypt. So I don't know. I have no idea where that came from, but that's just so now they fled Bethlehem, and they're in Egypt now. So Herod, we're going to talk about Herod a little bit now because we brought that name up a few times. Kind of an evil man, very evil. And the next portion of Matthew here is him ordering for all the 2 years and younger males to be killed in Bethlehem. He's really
probably male Jews. I would imagine they were male Jews.
Probably. I don't know. Does it say that? Actually, say that?
I don't think so. 2 years and under, kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years and under, based on the report of the wise men.
Fun fact. This is that's a horrible term for this. Yeah. But I was kind of thinking about it. I'm like, man, I wonder how many people were killed because of this order. And come to find out, it was like probably like 6 to 12 boys were probably killed during those 2 years. Bethlehem had a very small population. And they said probably no more than 20 at least, but probably more like 6 to 12.
But that's what's wild about that is that you figure they went in there and they killed 6 to 12 boys under 2, and Jesus still got away. So that means there was only let's just say 13 boys that would have been under that age, and the one that needed to get away got away. Like that right there is supernatural.
Yeah, right.
Just that he got away.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting because I always had in my mind like there was this massacre of, not that I'm not taking away anything. That's horrible. Like that's a horrible thing to do. But I always had in my mind growing up that there was like some dead babies everywhere, and come to find out it's just a handful over the years. Thank God. I mean, still a horrible thing.
But that makes it even more amazing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it wouldn't be that hard to pick out all the boys in Bethlehem
and find out, hey, where did that 13th boy go to? And continue to look for him and continue to kill more children in more cities just to make sure you can eliminate that child. Because now, you would think these parents would give up this one child. Like, hey, whoa, you're going to kill my child. There's one that did escape. He was with Joseph and Mary, and he left, and they were rumored to go, south. And then why would he not then pursue them south? Like the fact that didn't happen, that's pretty miraculous itself.
Yeah. So that happens, and then Herod dies. I don't know how Herod died, honestly. That's probably out there. A lot of those historical figures some of that's documented, but Herod dies, and then an angel comes to Joseph and tells him to go. I think they said to Israel.
He died. He died 2 years later of an incurable disease. Right here, okay. I read it. Herod the Great died in 4 BC. It says BC for some reason. It'd be before. Anyway, 4 BC of an incurable disease. Rome had trusted. So he died. That's why he was only in Egypt for 2 years, I guess. It's because Herod had died, and then he went back to Nazareth.
You think that's a typo?
It could be. I would think it'd be AD, unless they, Jews and Romans judge time in different ways too. So back then they did. So, maybe they're not calling it AD until he actually showed up at 30 years old. I don't know, but it says BC. So let's just say he died 2 years after Christ was born. I would say by what this says.
They end up in Galilee. In the city of Nazareth, and that's where you get Jesus from Nazareth. And I think, Patrick, was there another angel that came to Joseph and told him to flee to Nazareth?
Yeah, there was,
because Herod's son ended up taking over.
Yeah, yep, you're right. His son was Archelaus. Right here.
Yep,
the Lord appeared, and it says, when Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. Get up, the angel said, take the child and mother back to the land of Israel, because those who were trying to kill the child are dead. So he got up, returned to the land of Israel with Jesus and Mary. But when he learned the new ruler was Herod's son, Archelaus, he was afraid. So after being warned in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee, and they ended up being in Nazareth. And Nazareth, I think, was kind of a poor place. Like, it was not a very it was like somewhere where you just, like, the lesser people lived, I think, is kind of the way it was looked at. Like, not you wouldn't expect. In other words, they were surprised that the son of the Lord would have come out of such a place. In other words, I believe.
Yeah. So Nazareth all the way up here, you can see that's where Jesus lived for 25 to 27 years.
And there's Galilee just to the west of it or east of it.
Yep. The Sea of Galilee. We'll talk about that a little bit here in a little bit too. The Sea of Galilee. That's pretty important place. Okay. Now, so Jesus is up here in Nazareth, and the next portion of Matthew here is the good old John the Baptist.
Love old John the Baptist.
I always think of him as like a good old redneck guy, like that just lived out in the woods and
look here, man.
Camel hair clothes,
bugs.
And, that's how eating bugs and wild honey, That's how I picture John the Baptist, like real grumpy looking,
that's who I think of. Like I picture Cy Robertson coming out of hey.
And John's thing is he's baptizing people in the Jordan River. That's where he does his deeds. And I don't know. So Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist, right? And I think a question a lot of people have is like, why did Jesus need to be baptized? And there's quite a few reasons, I guess. Maybe we can talk about them a little bit more.
Well, he says it in here. Did you read that where he says it? He talks about it
to prepare his hearts. Or no. Let me go back here. We'll get to that. I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff.
Okay.
So we want to talk about like why was John the Baptist so important? Because there's a lot about John the Baptist before he actually baptizes Jesus, and it's hard telling how many people John the Baptist actually baptized, but essentially it was preparing people's hearts for when Jesus came, and his message was really so people could acknowledge they had sinned and repent. He also had an encounter in Mathew with the Pharisees and Sadducees. The Pharisees and Sadducees, I look at them as like the modern day
Joel Osteen.
No, like it's like it was like Republicans and Democrats. Like they were kind of political figures, I think, more or less in the Jewish.
But they were big in their church in the temple too, weren't they?
Yes.
They were also religious figures too, but they were they were like religious political figures. Like it all kind of wasn't it?
Yeah. That's what made sense to me, at least, is like, and the Pharisees were kind of known for being less wealthy, and then the Sadducees were kind of high class people.
Here's the thing right here. It says the Pharisees and Sadducees were two major religious groups in Israel at the time of Christ. The Pharisees were more religiously minded, while the Sadducees were more politically minded. Although the groups disliked and distrusted each other, they became allies in their common hatred for Jesus. And here it says their positive characteristics were they were committed to obeying all of God's commands. This is the Pharisees. Were admired by the common people for their apparent piety. So for their being so holy, but they weren't. Remember, these are all hypocrites. Jesus calls them out later on in the book. And believed in the bodily resurrection and eternal life, and believed in angels and demons. The Sadducees believed strongly in the law of Moses and Levitical purity. Were more practically minded than the Pharisees. So one, they kind of were. Each one's yin to its yang. They kind of.
Yep.
It's what it sounds like, because like I said, you had the law of Moses and Leviticus, which was like the washing of your hands and the don't touch the dead and the pork and all that stuff, right? And the that you have to, if you've read Leviticus, it goes on and on and on. So it's just, all those laws and they but they weren't obeying those laws either, but they were acting as they were, and they wanted to be admired by everybody for how good they were. And the Sadducees were kind of the same way as the Pharisees were the same way. They were all wanting to be admired, to be like it says, political, basically like a Democrat Republican Party, but just on a religious scale. Who's better, little different philosophies, but kind of two sides of the same coin, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
John has a run with them. He's not a big fan of them. It doesn't seem. And
No.
you hear about these groups a lot in the Bible. So there's a little section about that in Matthew about John calling them the brood. What how you pronounce that word?
Brood of vipers.
Brood of vipers. So then Jesus is baptized by John, and I wonder how many people were there when Jesus was baptized, because it could have been nobody, but then there's it says, I think somewhere in here, that there was many people baptized before Jesus was baptized.
Yeah.
Anyway, that had been an epic moment for John the Baptist to baptize Jesus.
It reads here in Matthew 3:13, says, then Jesus went from Galilee to the Jordan River to be baptized by John, but John tried to talk him out of it. I'm the one who needs to be baptized by you, he said. So why are you coming to me? But Jesus said it should be done, for we must carry out all that God requires. So John agreed to baptize him. So basically, Jesus was the ultimate example of everything we should do for God. And so he was showing, I believe, that the reason you were asking, like, we were saying, like, a question, like, why would he do this, is because he's got to be the example. So he has to show us how to be perfect for God. And in order to do that, he had to go through everything that we should be going through. So that's why he required himself to be baptized.
Yeah. And this was essentially the start of his ministry, like, and his willingness to take on our sin. John's an interesting character, man. I'd like to know more about that guy. He ends up dying in Matthew here, but they don't really go into much about that.
Are they doing the later Bibles? He's murdered by the, or I think he's beheaded by.
Yeah, he is.
Who was it? By Herod, or was it?
It was Herod's wife, or was it? No, it wouldn't have been Herod's wife. Not Herod. Herod's dead at this point.
There's another one. We'll get to that.
We'll eventually get to there. Someone can put it in the comments if they want, but
yeah,
someone wants his head on the platter, I think.
Yeah, his wife, the king's wife.
Yeah, may have been
of the time.
Herod's son.
I want to say is there two Herods? Is there another Herod after?
It seems like everybody has the same names in the Bible sometimes. Yeah. Like you have multiple Johns, Jameses. So I don't know. There could have been. Okay. Then that brings us up to chapter 4 now. And that's when, after Jesus is baptized, he goes into the wilderness. I'm looking for some reason, this thing's being ornery. I keep going to the wrong page here. Let me try to find the map of this. What do you got on chapter 4, Patrick, while I'm trying to look for this map?
Okay, I got to answer real quick to the question. John the Baptist was executed and beheaded by Herod Antipas. So it was Herod.
Okay.
On the request of his daughter.
That's right.
So John chapter 4, or Matthew chapter 4, is basically when Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights and was tested by the devil. A lot of interesting dialogue between him and the devil while he was away. And I think it was basically Jesus going in there and preparing for his ministry. So now he's been baptized. So now he goes into the wilderness to fast and to get closer to God and to speak with God for his purpose, basically, on how he was going to do his ministry. It's kind of what it is. And the devil came to him, and tried to get him away from his purpose and tried to show him that he did try to do everything he does to us. So it's showing too that Jesus wasn't immune to the devil, as far as the devil trying to persuade him to do sin and to sin against God. But Jesus, even fasted and hungry, didn't give in. his faith and his mission and his purpose for God kept him there. So there's another example of how we need to treat the devil. A lot of these are just examples. If you look into them, Jesus is constantly showing us an example of how God wants us to be, constantly. But that's kind of what goes on in the very beginning. And then Jesus starts preaching. That's in 4:12. That's when he comes out of the wilderness, and that's when he starts his ministry, actually. And John's been arrested by this time. He returned back to Galilee, went to Nazareth, and then off on his ministry went.
Yeah. So Jesus leaves out of Nazareth, and he's baptized in the Jordan right down here. If you guys can see that, I know it's kind of small. By John, and then down to the wilderness, somewhere down in here, I reckon. For
Looks wild.
Yeah. So that's a visual of where Jesus is right now in Matthew. And so with the temptations, I guess, Patrick, did you go over? Sorry, I was looking for that when you were talking. Did you go over what was actually tempted?
So he said, during that time, the 40 days and 40 nights, the devil came to him and said, "If you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread." And Jesus is very hungry. He's been fasting.
Yeah, you remember he's fasting for 40 days.
However many days he'd been in there, probably not the 40, but he'd probably been in there for a while. But Jesus told him, "No, the scriptures say people do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, "If you're the Son of God, jump off. For the scriptures say he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone." Jesus responded, "The scriptures also say you must not test the Lord your God." Next, the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms in the world and their glory. "I will give it to you. I will give it all to you," he said, "if you will kneel down and worship me." He says, "Get out of here, Satan." Jesus told him, "For the scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him." So the devil went away. The angels came and took care of Jesus. Then, boom, he comes back, starts starts preaching in Galilee.
Yep. That was always like the concept of being in the wilderness, starving essentially, and the devil. Like, that's a crazy thing to think about, man. Like the devil tempting you with things.
Yep.
Okay. So that happens, like Patrick says, comes in to do his ministry. He starts finding some disciples.
Mm-hmm.
His first ones he finds is Peter and Andrew, and those boys were fishing when he found them.
Yep, they're brothers too.
They're brothers.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good chance that in Matthew, it's always like Jesus sees him in the fishing in the Sea of Galilee on the shore, and tells them that, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men," and they just pick up their nets and go with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always like, what kind of guy would just see a random person that you don't know, maybe you do, maybe you don't, and then follow him? But come to find out, I was looking into it. It's like there's a good chance John the Baptist probably was in these people's ears at this point in time, and John probably even, there's a good chance John baptized James and John before this encounter with Jesus to be called his disciples.
Now, in the later Gospels, because they're all different perspectives and written differently by 4 different people, is this the time also when they throw their nets over and they're not catching any fish?
Yeah, there's details that are missing in Matthew. They'll find vice versa in other
that's
Gospels.
why you got to read them all, but we'll get to that stuff. But I think that's also another thing he did to show him his miracle, which convinced them to follow him. Rather than just saying, "Hey, come follow me," and they're like, "Oh, okay, we'll just quit fishing and we're going to go follow you." He showed them what he could do for them, and probably a lot more to it. But this is the abbreviated. These are the highlight reels, basically.
Yeah, the Matthew's very abbreviated with this story because it doesn't make sense. Like if you're just starting to read the Bible and you start here, you're like, well, that seems like there should be more to that story, and there is in other Gospels. But it's just interesting to think about that. Like, there's probably at this point in time, I think Jesus's his ministry is spread quite a bit right here. Especially if you were in John the Baptist, pocket, I guess. Then who's he find next then?
James and John.
James and John, yep. And they're brothers as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're fishermen.
Yep. Yeah. We like those fishermen.
Oh, yeah.
Well, think about how crazy that would be, though. These guys, they're with their fathers, too. So the father's always been a fisherman. His sons are fishermen. This is how they feed their family. This is how they feed the community. This is how they make their living, right? All of a sudden, this hippie walks up, right, with a beard and long hair, set of sandals and some,
whose best friend is the redneck who's ducking people in the
whose best
water.
Friends are redneck ducking people in the water, And he comes up to him and he says, "Hey, look, y'all just follow me and I'll show you how to bring men to the kingdom." And they just go and they leave their dad. Like, what a leap of faith those guys took.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I believe as the other gospels, the other three gospels will tell you, he was a little more to it than that. It wasn't just, "Hey, come with me." And so they saw some miracles that made them believe, like, all right, maybe we need to take this guy seriously and see what he's all about. And so that's when they left and decided to follow him and travel with him in his ministry. So those were the first 4 disciples he had.
Yep. And then Jesus starts his ministry, ministering to greater crowds from there, where he performs miracles and heals people. There's a whole list of things. Takes out, oppresses demons, all that kind of stuff. Then he starts kind of really spreading his name, if you want to say it, or God's name.
Yep. Man,
I don't know. I don't know. What do you guys think? I guess we could just reflect.
We can talk about all this. I mean, I think there's plenty to talk about.
Because 5 is chapter 5 is probably the best. That's the best chapter. Yeah, that's the best chapter.
That's one you want to. Yeah. 5, 6, 7, and I think 8 are all the sermons.
Seven at least. Yeah, those all will. That's whenever we get into a lot of detail and just like.
Yeah, it's 5, 6, and 7. 5, 6, and 7 are one we need to go over with in a separate study. But for sure,
I agree.
But,
yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like, what do you think about like manger scenes and stuff like that? Going back to the very start of Mathew, do you think there's ever like, I think in the Bible, isn't there something where it mentions that you should not, recreate like paint pictures of God or any of that kind of stuff? Like, you think it's good that we do all that stuff?
I think it's all intent. So, like, I think on Christmas I think put that out in front of your house is a lot better than putting a big blow up Santa Claus and frosted snowman.
Yeah,
because that's not even what Christmas is for, right? We're celebrating Jesus Christ. So, no, I don't think so. I mean, personally, I think it's the best thing you can put out at Christmas. Maybe because you're celebrating his birth. I mean, I don't think I would put a cross out because that's Easter, right?
Sure.
That you're celebrating Easter with the cross and the crucifixion. That's what he did. You're celebrating his birth because you're celebrating the vessel God gave us to show us how to live a perfect life and how to and how to have a relationship with God. So no, I don't really think so. I think that's actually more appropriate than the Santa Claus and the little lights twinkling.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Christmas trees and all that stuff. Even though that stuff is, the lore actually of Santa Claus, since what we were talking about earlier in the year with your boys and stuff. The lore of that is he was just a guy, Saint Nick, that went around and gave kids gifts on Christmas, and he was just a nice guy. So I think that's cool. But I think that the way that the West has done it is they've glorified that as over for these kids over God or over Christ. And so we're not celebrating Christmas because it's what God gave us as far as the grace to be in a relationship with him, but so that we get gifts if we're good. And it also kind of reinforces that thing where you think like you go to heaven through works instead of by grace. You're like, we don't go to heaven because we're good. We don't go to heaven because we were nice to this guy or gave money to this poor guy or whatever. We go to heaven because Jesus bled on the cross for the sins we've committed and we're going to commit. So, Christmas is actually kind of almost demonic the way that the West has turned it into. When you and I were talking about that, I was like, "You're crazy. You're gonna tell your boys that
Yeah.
that." I'm like,
Yeah. We don't
yeah,
make sure nobody. Yeah, no
yeah,
kids are
yeah.
watching.
You're gonna tell your boys that about Christmas and stuff. And I was like, I don't know. That's just not. But when I started thinking about it, man, are we kind of worshiping a false idol?
Yeah, you're definitely lying to your kids.
Well, and not only that, but as Americans or as Westerners in our culture too, we're really not celebrating for the reason we need to be celebrating for. We're celebrating it because it's a day off to get with our families, which is great. You can do that anytime.
Yeah.
And we're buying presents and telling kids if they're good, they get presents. And that's kind of hypocritical to Christ's message, which is it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it's presents and all that, but it kind of goes hand in hand, like, oh, if I'm good, then Santa gets me presents. And so then they start thinking of Jesus as like, oh, if I'm good, I'll go to heaven. If I believe it. No, it's like way more than that. And you can't buy your way into heaven, and you can't be good enough, and you don't deserve it. But because he died on the cross, it's a free gift that you can't repay. It made a lot more sense to me. Of course, you go telling women that, and they're like, what? No, you can't do that.
Yeah, it's
probably one of the devil's tricks, honestly.
It's something I struggle with a little bit because, because you could go about it in a different manner. Like you could still get them gifts and pretend in Christmas, but you could frame it and be like, "Hey, look, Jesus has blessed us that we have money that I can buy you some gifts. What would you want?"
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a bad thing to get your kids gifts and stuff, but we definitely turn it into this holiday of Santa Claus and reindeer and whatever instead of
idolatry and materialism. Like everybody expects on Christmas. Like I am so against giving gifts. Like on Christmas, I tell people don't buy me anything because I ain't buying you nothing. Like I'm sorry. I think it's all we're doing is making corporate America rich. If I want something, I'll buy it myself. If I want to buy my wife a gift, I can buy her a gift any day of the year
on her birthday.
But, and some people, well, it's special, but no, it's really not. It's like we've turned Christmas into this corporate holiday, and we've lost the true meaning of why we're celebrating in the first place, and that's we're celebrating the gift that God gave us so that we can live in a relationship with Him. And so, I see Christmas a totally different way now than I used to, and also since you and me had our talk, I agree with you on what we talked about during your season.
Daniels, he mentions is a manufactured holiday from Coca-Cola. I've heard that Coke had a huge part in how we celebrate Christmas now. I think it was something like they weren't selling enough Coke during the winter months. People buy their Coke in summertime when it's hot, and they couldn't get it. People buying it in the winter time, so they came up with this marketing scheme where they put Santa Claus on everything, and you could see a bunch of stuff back in the day where Coca-Cola, Santa Claus was like a mascot for them.
Yeah.
And
then
really
they put cocaine in it. At some point in time, they had cocaine. I've heard that. I don't know. My grandmother told me that she was around when they did it. If they did do it, which I believe her, she was not a liar. She was a very Christian woman. So I believe they probably did a little Santa Claus, a little angel dust, and off to the races. Coca-Cola went. A little high fructose corn syrup, and now everybody's drinking Coke during the holidays. But I think we got away from it. I think that. And another thing too with the Bible, and I don't know how people see it though, is like when you're a kid, and I think a lot of the Westerners think this way too. I say Westerners because we're more Christian society, I guess, and more not true Christian society like the American Western Christian society, which is not really truly, in my opinion, following Christ or even knowing who He is, like by reading just the Gospels. I mean, the minimum you could do is read the Gospels for gosh sake, And I just think that. I think that we get away from it, the true meaning, Christmas and everything of what we're supposed to be thankful for, and we see Him as a as an Easter bunny. I think a lot of people see Jesus as an Easter bunny / Santa Claus, tooth fairy kind of and they see the Bible as a religious document. And if people would look at the Bible as a historical document that goes back to the beginning and the Word of God that has endured, like when Wes Huff was on, they were talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they were talking about a Bible, like a 4th century Bible, or 4th century Bible that they had found, and how the book of Isaiah and the Dead Sea Scrolls word for word matched the 4th century Bible. So that's thousands of years, or however many years since the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, which was way before Christ, to 400 BC. Do you know what the likelihood of those two things matching identically would be? So the Bible is authentic. I mean, from the start to finish, and it has endured longer. I mean, longer than any historical document in history. So people will look at it more as a historical document to learn who Jesus is, rather than just a religious book that talks about this guy that might be made up, might not be, that came down and wrote, and this was all written by men. When you start really understanding it, man, it starts to really become real to you. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's just, if you try to explain it to people that you're trying to not convert, but if you're trying to introduce to the gospel, I always try to introduce it as, it's a historical document. It's not just, quit thinking about it as the Bible, and got Jesus as Jesus, like this, this tooth fairy character. Like, think of Jesus as, you would George Washington or Genghis Khan. Not good people, but I'm just saying historical figures, right? Napoleon, right? We know Napoleon. We don't, Napoleon, when I don't know what century he was around, like off the top of my head, 16th, 17th century. I don't know. I might be wrong. I'm not a historical person on that. But if you look back at that, like, well, what's the difference? Like, why do we know about Napoleon and know what he did? It was a long time ago, but it's because eyewitnesses wrote it down, and it's been transcribed and disseminated. And it's through all the years we learned. Why do we know about George Washington? That was 200 years ago. But why do we know about him? Well, we know about him because of the same way we know about Jesus. It's just an older book. So,
Yep. I thought a lot about Christmas this year and just what we want to do going forward. And, it's a tough one, because, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with tradition either.
I think Christmas trees are awesome. I think Santa Claus is awesome. I think the spirit of Santa Claus is awesome. I think making that day special for kids is awesome, but I don't think they need to be conflated with Jesus Christ. I think you need to know Santa only exists because Jesus Christ was given to us on this day. And this Santa Claus character was a historical character that went around giving kids gifts on Christmas, and we keep the spirit alive, and his spirit lives today. But he's not to be confused with who Jesus Christ was at all. Like, Santa is a man who died, and we keep the spirit of his giving to kids on Christmas and giving gifts on Christmas today. And he did it on Jesus's birthday. So we put the two together, and we do it on the same day that we celebrate Jesus, and it's the spirit of giving. And why are we giving? Because God gave us grace in Jesus. And so Santa Claus, maybe you could explain this. So Santa Claus gives gifts to kids, and to show, to give. Maybe that's a way to explain it to them.
Yeah.
But that makes sense. I think the way we do it is it's Christmas. Is you ready for what Santa Claus is going to bring you? You want to go sit on Santa's lap?
It's nonstop, dude.
Let's put up our Santa lights. Let's put up our Christmas tree with Santa Claus and our star on it. Well, the star is representative of the star that the wise men looked at to is the sign for Jesus coming. I just it's just all.
And I think this is probably not going to happen, but you always worry, like your kids are going to eventually find out, right? Whether they find out at school or you tell them, whatever. And it's like, man, you're lying to them pretty hard through some of this stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, and then, if they're rebellious or something, because, if they have a rebellious side anyway, like some kids do, it's like, then they start thinking like, well, what else is Dad lying to me about? Is this Jesus guy real, or is it's like, man, I don't know. It feels weird to me right now. It really does.
And think about this too. How many people describe the Bible as a historical document when they describe it? I bet you it's like
no
1%. Even Christians that say they're Christians that aren't scholars. I mean, the only reason I do is because I've really been studying this stuff and watching content on YouTube and people that are Christian philosophers and things on TikTok and hearing them when they explain the Bible to other people from their studies of the Bible. We're talking guys that studied it for Cliff Connectley, studied it for 50, 60 years. This Wes Huff, who's been studying it for probably 25 years, these guys keep using these terms. So that's what made me start going, if I think about it historically, it really starts to become more real to me than if I think about it the way I thought about it was, it's the Bible. It tells us about Jesus and about God. And these are things I can't touch and these things I can't see. But when you think about like history, you can think, well, somebody saw it. Yeah, somebody saw Jesus and somebody touched Jesus. So he was real at one time. Like we know God's real, but we have not you cannot physically see or touch God, right? You can see what he did and he's real, but you can't physically. Like Jesus was physically, people saw him, touched him, talked to him, all that stuff, right? He died, he lived, he bled, he did all the things, Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get into all that too in Matthew's. So.
Yeah. And Luke, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
All of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and actually Matthew and John were the only two that were actually eyewitness disciples. Luke and Mark wrote as people who talked to eyewitness accounts.
Yep.
They weren't disciples. And Luke was a Gentile. I think it was Luke was a Gentile. He wasn't even a Jew.
Yeah. Yeah. Leave in the comment section what you guys think about the Santa Claus thing.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's like, it's crazy how, I don't know how to say it, but like in the 90s and like when I was growing up, with pre-internet, when you didn't have all this information, like how media controlled everything so much because we had such a narrow, gap of information that we could get things from. And it's like, it just feels like Christmas just blew up in the 90s in that manner where it became more about, because my grandparents, dude, like I didn't hardly get gifts at all from my grandparents, that generation. And I think it's because, they were like, we're going to church. We go to church like Christmas, you go Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, like you go the whole thing. I might get a gift from them, and nowadays, like grandparents, dude, like my parents get my kids so much. I mean, dozens of gifts. You know what I mean? It's like a generation thing. And I think it's the influence of media back then and how they inflated Christmas so much. And it turned it into a money grab instead of what it was back in the 60s and 70s, when my grandparents were coming up. It was more of a Christian holiday.
Right.
And then it became just about gifts, and Santa Claus. I don't know. Well, that's probably
no, but I think as we get older too, like, my the generation, 20 years ahead of me, then you got my generation, then you got your generation, then you got this next generation. Like kids are getting more and more materialistic. Materialism is getting bigger.
Yeah.
And God in the West is shrinking. Right. Like if you go to countries like Africa and China that are oppressed and they don't have anything, God, Jesus is huge. Like he's blowing, Christianity's blowing up. You come to our world and it's shrinking. We're not having babies. We're focused on materialism. And I think our country used to be focused a whole lot more on the grace of God giving us this country. And I think now it's just, we've become gluttonous in America.
Yeah.
But good thing is, like you were saying about now with these medias, like what we're doing with a podcast here and like what other people are doing with their podcasts and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, all these ways you can connect with other people of the Christian faith and learn from them. Where, like, man, I'm gonna tell you right now, if it wasn't for Cliff Connectley and watching his videos on YouTube and TikTok, I wouldn't know half of what I know now about the Bible, or even have probably started to read the Bible like I did 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Really deep into it. And so there's a lot of people, and you and me might be changing somebody's mind right here by going into Mathew, and somebody might have been watching it and thinking, well, we'll see what these two hunters are talking about, And then when we start talking about, well, if you look at it from a historical document, because that's what clicked with me. And then somebody says, I've never thought about it like that. And then, I say, read these 4 books. Just start with these 4, see where it goes. 6 minutes a day. Read for 6 minutes a day and start in Mathew and roll on. That'll maybe put the bug in somebody's ear, where before they're stuck in their bubble. They don't go to church. Their family doesn't go to church. They don't have any access to any kind of Christian material anywhere. And they just so happen to be thumbing through a TikTok and see Cliff, or they going through YouTube and they're like, oh, I like Before the Echo. Let's see what they're talking about this week. They're talking about the Bible. And boom, it plants a seed in them. And then next thing you know, that seed starts to grow and they start to look at things differently just because of something you or I said. Yeah. So I think we got a lot more ways to get close to Christ if we use them in the correct form, as far as like the internet, and these podcasts are awesome, tools for it.
You can get into it a lot deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. You got a long form. You talk about it.
Anyway, do you know if Jesus was born in like what month they think he was born in actually?
I don't know. I don't think it's the 25th of December. I think it was in the winter solstice. Okay. I believe it was in the winter solstice, but I don't know if it's on the 25th of December.
Yeah.
I just don't know where.
I don't think it is.
A lot of, I think the Vatican and like the Romans had a lot to do with that when they realized the power of Christianity, because that's why they kind of converted. Like, that's when it kind of blew up, was in the Roman Empire, started seeing how powerful it had become. I think that's when they kind of adopted it and they kind of did their thing with it. So, I think, don't quote me on that, but no, I don't think his historical birthday is on the 25th of December exactly. I think it's got something to do with the winter solstice, which is the 21st. And then that star, I'm sure, has something to do with it. Maybe they trace the star back in the location based on biblical prophecy, and who knows?
All right, we've been on here an hour. That's a good amount of time.
Good start.
Yeah, if you guys want to support this show, make sure you share it with someone. It'd be awesome to get a great big group of people on here. So we'll be back in Mathew. If you guys want to keep reading ahead, that's where we're gonna stay in Mathew until we're finished with it. We'll probably, I don't know, Patrick, you probably get through 5, and we'll probably get through, I don't know, we maybe get 5, 6, and 7 or something like that.
I think we can get the Sermon on the Mount next week, and just, it might be a little bit longer podcast, but if everybody wants to read through to that point, that'd be awesome. Read as much as you can. 6 minutes a day. Wake up, fix your coffee or your Monster Energy drink, and grab the Bible and read it for 6 minutes a day. You can get it on your phone. If you don't have one at home, you can look it up on your phone. You can also listen to it in your car on the way to work. Although I think reading it is a better way for me to absorb it personally, is to actually read the words and, stuff like that. But however you get it, it's just as long as you get it.
Yeah. It's the medicine. If you want to grab one of these Bibles, I left it in the link in the. So, cool. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Yep. God bless you. I'll see you next week.
Say a prayer for Brandy, Patrick's wife. She's having some
toothache. She got bad toothache, and hopefully it'll go away. Say a prayer for me too, man. I went back into law enforcement, so I can use all the prayers for safety and God's will to be done as you can. So it's not in Memphis, so I feel a little bit better.
I feel a lot safer. Yeah,
anything can
happen. And then you got COVID too. That was fun.
Yeah, getting over COVID, man. We're like a nursing home in this house right now. We both had COVID, toothaches.
Yeah, we went through that in late December. Everybody was sick, and Huck had surgery. As a mess here for a while, but time passes and things get good again. So, all right, everybody, have a good night.
See y'all.
Talk to you later. Bye.